I want to bring in Global Affairs analyst Michael Bociurkiw, and he's a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, and he's live from Kyiv to help us put all of this into context. Welcome, Michael. Always good to have you on. Your reaction from those new comments from Pete Hegseth, what do you make of that?
Good to be with you, Eleni. Well, not surprising. I mean, it's pretty consistent with what Mr. Hegseth said during his confirmation hearings. He also said that the U.S. needs to pivot to Indo-Pacific to deter China. But I was a bit surprised. I mean, he actually knew what Minsk was. I don't think he knew during his confirmation hearings what those agreements contained. But, you know, the feeling here in Ukraine is, I think they probably feel after hearing this, is that they really have to take measures to end up at the negotiating table and not on the menu. But day by day, almost hour for hour, it feels like the U.S. has less of Ukraine's back, and that's very worrisome.
Yeah. Well, you're in Kyiv right now, and you've told our producers it was a particularly violent night. Tell us what you've seen on the ground.
Yeah, there were 7 ballistic missiles and 123 drones, and only about half of the drones were brought down, which is very unusual. So this is like the Russia sending a tsunami of missiles and drones. And I think at one time overnight, there were 4 or 5 fires right here in Kyiv. So it was a very, very violent night, and yet another night where people are not getting sleep, children are anxious and that sort of thing. So, but it goes to show that unless the West is able to deter Mr. Putin even further, he will actually push his luck. And one more thing, Eleni, I think after Mr. Hegseth's comments about NATO, do not be surprised if Mr. Putin tries to test that NATO principle of indefensible borders. So, for example, if they were to, for example, send missiles into Estonia or Poland, God forbid, he would like to test whether NATO will respond robustly. That could happen.
Yeah. I'm curious, you know, President Trump said that Ukraine could be Russian one day. What are you reading into this? And, you know, you were talking about Ukraine not being on the menu, but being at the negotiating table. So tell me what you're reading into this rhetoric.
Well, it's pretty bad. Of course, on the one hand, we have to take whatever Mr. Trump says with a grain of salt, because it seems to me and many others that whatever he spouts out is from whatever someone whispered into his ear the minutes beforehand. But I mean, I think he's talking with the same carelessness as he's talking about Gaza and his so-called plan for that piece of land. It's a lot of absurdity in what he's saying, and it's just not practical. And I think you're also hearing Mr. Trump echoing what Mr. Putin is saying in many, many different statements over the past few days. So again, lots and lots of concern here in Kyiv. And if the mood was dark before, it's even much, much darker now after these statements.
Yeah. So the American school teacher, Mark Fogel, is now back in the United States. CNN confirmed that a Russian citizen was released in exchange. Here's what Mr. Trump said about the exchange. Take a listen.
I think there's goodwill in terms of the war. It could be a big, important part of getting the war over with Ukraine.
All right, he says there's goodwill to getting the war over with Ukraine.
I'm shaking my head, you know, because this was basically low-hanging fruit, Mark Fogel. It was a very, very small crime. I mean, there are Americans behind bars in Russia right now with much bigger kind of targets on the back, one of them being Senator Havana, a U.S.-Russian dual national who was put behind bars for 12 years for treason just for donating $52 to a Ukrainian charity. So I can't figure out, and neither can anyone else, how this is related to ending the Ukraine war any sooner. I think it's more a case of the two leaders testing each other out.
So very quickly, Michael, USAID, end of assistance to Ukraine. What is going on the ground?
Terrible. Ukraine was getting about $35 billion since the full-scale invasion by Russia of USAID aid. And right now, for example, we have transformers that were on their way to Kyiv to replace those that were blown up by the Russians. They're stuck at the border. The East Europe Foundation, one of the biggest nonprofits here, they've had to already start laying off people. And they do things, Eleni, like they build bomb shelters in schools. They do mine awareness programs. These are all things that at the end of the day keep Ukrainians alive. And one more quick thing, the other USAID money, billions of it going towards repairing port infrastructure. If those ports are not operating, grain and barley is not going to leave Ukrainian ports for places like Egypt and the United States. That will have a terrible knock-on effect too.
All right, Michael Bociurkiw, great to have you with us. Thank you so much.